There I was, standing right at the edge of what used to be a mountain dam, solid and true. But now it was just this unstoppable, roaring, beautiful wall of water, tearing straight through the 58 brand-new luxury homes the HOA had illegally built over my inheritance. Freeze frame. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how in the world I ended up flooding an entire, expensive suburban development, and more importantly, why every lawyer, bureaucrat, and sheriff's deputy in 3 counties couldn't stop me. It all started the moment they decided they could just steal the most precious thing my grandfather had ever left me when Grandpa Elias passed, and this was maybe 5 years ago now. The last thing I expected was for his greatest gift to become a battlefield, you know. He left me his land, this huge, sprawling piece of the old country out in the foothills of the Appalachians. Wide open fields, dense woods thick enough you could actually lose your signal and yourself, too, if you weren't careful. And right at the heart of it all was the Vance Wall, the massive mountain dam he had personally designed and built after surviving the kind of biblical flood that wiped half the valley off the map way back in the 40s. It wasn't just concrete and earth. It was a testament, a wall of stone, stubbornness, and grim memory, an inheritance of defiance handed down through bloodlines. The will was clear, notarized, witnessed, everything. The land, the water rights, the mineral rights, every last inch of dirt that touched the soil belonged to me, Elias Vance, free and clear. I was the dam keeper, just like he was. For a while I lived in total peace. I worked my quiet contracting job in town, spent my weekends fixing the old barbed wire fences, walking the dam's crest, just watching the seasons turn across the foothills. The first sign of trouble didn't come with a bang or a bulldozer. It was just a whisper. A crisp, clean letter in my mailbox with a gold-embossed logo I'd never seen before. Stone Creek Valley Homeowners Association. I frowned. I wasn't part of any HOA. My property sat outside the town limits, protected by grandfather's zoning that went back 60 years. At least it was supposed to be. The letter informed me, with this sickening, saccharine, polite tone, that I was now subject to community review under new county maps that had been mysteriously approved during the last municipal session. Curiosity turned to total dread when I showed up at the next town meeting. There was this slick, smiling woman with perfect helmet hair, presenting brightly colored maps, showing the aggressive expansion of the Stone Creek Valley community. And there in heavy blue ink was my land, folded right into their development plan like it had never belonged to anyone else. Like it was a piece of cheap origami. I stood up, furious, my voice shaking a little at first, demanding to know how this outright theft could possibly happen. That's when I met Veronica Sterling, HOA president, self-proclaimed community visionary, and the living, breathing embodiment of the word menace. She didn't miss a beat. She acted completely confused, tilting her head like a curious owl, then assured me it was all perfectly legal. A simple survey mistake, she said, her voice dripping with fake pity, that has now been clerical corrected. She actually patted my arm. I left that meeting with this gnawing, hollow pit in my stomach, feeling the first hint of real systemic dread. I knew instantly I wasn't fighting a mistake. I was fighting an apparatus. Over the next 2 weeks, my quiet fields turned into a nightmare. Surveyors trampled everything, leaving bright neon flags popping up like invasive weeds across the property. Each one felt like a nail in the coffin of Grandpa's legacy. Then the machines came. Bulldozers and excavators rolled in, carving wide, ugly roads straight through the pasture, where my grandfather taught me to ride a horse, right next to where we used to hunt arrowheads. Foundations were poured in this fast, cheap, sloppy grid. Before I could even catch my breath, the HOA had green-lit 58 homes. They called them luxury craftsman style, right on top of my family's land. I tried everything. I hired an honest, sharp local lawyer, but even he got this tight, nervous look when he saw Veronica's name on the county paperwork. Clerks were suddenly evasive. Property officers mysteriously lost my filed complaints, and Veronica just smiled sweetly every time I saw her. Her army of board members nodded behind her like well-trained attack dogs, total sycophants. They were making me look like the crazy one, the stubborn, dust-covered holdout clinging to outdated maps. At the second town meeting, Veronica actually suggested, with this sickly sweet voice, that I should accept one of their generous buyouts before. And I remember this clearly. Progress left you behind. I remember the silence that fell when I stood up. My legs felt steady this time, and I said, loud enough for every developer and bureaucrat to hear, cutting through the smug chatter, I will never sell what my family built. Not for any price. You can't put a price on memory. That was the moment the fight shifted from legal theft to open hostility. Violation notices started appearing on my old truck. Fines for imaginary code breaches stacked up like unpaid utility bills. I woke up one morning to find a sign staked right into my own yard declaring the area an upcoming development zone. No trespassing. My own damn yard. I found out later, from a friend who worked in records, that Stone Creek Valley HOA had been making heavy donations to certain council campaigns, building inspection waivers, zoning exception approvals. It was all being papered over with smiling pictures and quiet handshake deals. I was outgunned, outmaneuvered, and totally outvoted. It was corruption, pure and simple, wrapped in a linen jacket. I knew I couldn't beat them head on. Not yet. So I did what any patient man who loves his land would do. I retreated. I pretended to give up. I stopped coming to town meetings. I let the flags stay in my fields. I even waved back politely when Veronica drove by, flashing her blindingly fake smile from her brand new white Range Rover. And while they celebrated, breaking ground, selling lots like conquering heroes, I worked. I became a ghost on my own land. I meticulously documented every single move they made, every construction violation, every environmental impact they ignored, every tree they bulldozed that was marked for preservation. I recorded every conversation, saved every letter, and made copies of every shady, fast-tracked zoning approval I could dig up late at night from the public archives. I built my own quiet case, a fortress of proof stacked up in dusty boxes in my grandfather's old workshop, which was ironically located right under the Vance wall itself. I didn't make a sound. I didn't lift a finger to stop them. I watched them pour hundreds of thousands of dollars, their own or the bank's, it didn't matter, into infrastructure they didn't understand. They laid water lines across unstable soil and built McMansions right over the old known flood basins, without so much as a geological survey. They thought the land would simply bow to their blueprints. They didn't realize that some things, especially old country land and the bloodlines that guard it, don't break just because you scribble over them with ink and concrete. Paper means nothing when the rain starts to fall and the mountain starts to roar. The Vance Wall had always been the silent guardian of the valley. 80 years ago, after that biblical flood, Grandpa and the other survivors built it, not a high-tech concrete monstrosity, but old-world engineering, a massive buttress of earth, rock, timber, and faith designed to hold back the mountain's wrath. For decades it worked, but when the HOA came in with their glittering plans, they didn't even pause to consider the dam. In their minds, it was just another ugly bump on the landscape. They paved over drainage channels, rerouted creeks, and bulldozed entire swaths of the old floodplain to make room for cul-de-sacs. The crowning insult came the day I watched, hidden behind the tree line, as a backhoe operator, neon vested and zero awareness, gouged a chunk right out of the dam's outer shoulder. Not a total collapse, but enough to tear open a weakness that would fester with the first heavy rains. I wanted to charge down the hill screaming, to throw my body between them and the bones of my grandfather's work. But I didn't. I stayed hidden. I understood that they didn't just disrespect the land. They had no idea they were building their perfect suburb on a ticking time bomb of their own making. I didn't cause the dam to fail. That would have been a criminal act. I simply stopped protecting it. I intentionally stopped patching up the minor leaks after storms. I stopped clearing the intake channels that kept pressure from building up behind the wall. I let the debris gather, the silt accumulate. I became invisible, letting the natural forces simmer just beneath the surface. I let the laws of physics and hydrology, laws older and far more ruthless than any HOA charter, do what they were always going to do once the arrogant little empire of Stone Creek Valley decided it knew better than the mountain. The irony? All their careful, expensive construction work only accelerated the inevitable. Their storm drains choked with debris, their manicured lawns sloughed off topsoil into retention ponds. They rerouted ancient waterways without understanding that the mountain didn't care about property lines. It cared only about gravity, about water pressure. The first great storm rolled in like a slow, ominous drumbeat, pounding against the mountains until the rocks themselves seemed to hum. I sat on the covered porch of the old house, thermos in, hand watching the gray wall of rain crawl across the valley. In the subdivision below, little yellow squares of porch light blinked against the gloom. I knew deep in my bones that the dam, wounded and neglected, would not save them this time. As the rain poured down hour after hour, I walked the perimeter of what had been my fields. Even in the downpour, I could see it happening. Long, jagged fissures opening in the brand new sidewalks. Fine spiderweb cracks forming along the foundations of houses that hadn't even been occupied yet. I passed Veronica's house, that gleaming temple to hubris, perched proudly on the ridge. I could see her through the massive picture window, phone clamped to her ear, gesturing wildly. I could almost hear her voice through the glass, blaming the weather, blaming bad luck, blaming anyone but herself. It was chaos. It was almost beautiful. Like watching a sandcastle finally crumble beneath an incoming tide. The second storm came 3 days later, colder and meaner, roaring out of the mountains with a rage that felt almost personal. I felt the pressure shift before I saw the clouds. The Vance wall groaned under the added weight. Minor leaks along the shoulder widened into muddy scars. A small breach, no bigger than a man's fist, spat muddy water down the hillside. Then another. Then another. I stood on the highest ridge, the wind whipping rain into my face, and watched as the dam gave its last ragged sigh. The earth trembled. Under my boots, a deep gut-punch rumble, and then with a roar that shook the entire valley, the wall burst. Not a clean explosion, but a slow, brutal collapse as tons of water, trapped and furious, tore through the breach and poured down the mountainside. The force of it shredded trees like matchsticks. The water took the path of least resistance, the path it had always taken before man tried to tame it. And that path led straight to Stone Creek Valley. In seconds, the first row of homes, still draped with for sale banners and pathetic little patriotic bunting, were swallowed by a boiling wall of brown water. I watched roofs lift like leaves, walls crumple like wet cardboard. Streets buckled and split open, swallowing minivans and decorative mailboxes alike. Veronica's house, that gleaming temple, stood firm for a moment longer. I could see her on the porch screaming into her phone, frozen in the headlights of disaster. The water reached her foundation, hesitated like a predator savoring the moment, then surged. The ground beneath her perfect lawn liquefied. The house shuddered, leaned drunkenly, and with an awful groan cracked cleanly in half. One side slid into the churning flood. The other collapsed backward in a slow, almost graceful bow. It was over in minutes. The emergency crews came then, too late. Always too late. I watched from a distance, dry and calm. My heart was thudding, slow and steady. Part of me wanted to feel guilty. A much louder part felt only grim, absolute satisfaction. I had tried to warn them. I had the certified letters, the emails, the time-stamped proof. I had told them, and they, in their arrogance, had ignored every single word. The insurance adjusters descended like vultures once the skies cleared. They walked the muddy ruins with grim expressions, poking at collapsed driveways and half-buried foundation slabs with metal poles. Claims were filed. Claims were denied. Acts of God, the adjusters shrugged. Negligence, the lawyers whispered. Veronica tried to sue everyone, the county, the developers, the contractors, even me. Nothing stuck. Their own surveys, their own ignored warnings, their own greed had sealed their fate. I had my fortress of documentation. I was legally shielded. The HOA, once so smug, found itself drowning in lawsuits from furious homeowners. State regulators launched a full investigation, exposing every corner of Veronica's carefully constructed empire. Kickbacks, bribery, fraudulent impact reports. One revelation after another. The names once whispered in fear were now printed in bold black ink. alongside words like embezzlement and gross negligence. I watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction, never once stepping into the spotlight. The best part? Their insurance claims were all denied. Every last one. Lawsuits drained what little wealth the board members had left. Veronica's beloved Range Rover was repossessed first, then her jewelry, then her house, or at least what remained of it after the floodwaters had taken their toll. I heard she moved in with a cousin, scraping by on temp jobs, clinging to a grudge so bitter it could curdle milk. Meanwhile, I moved quietly, methodically. I filed my own paperwork, a petition for adverse possession. Thanks to their abandonment, the laws were finally on my side. The flooded lots, the crumbling streets, the swampy remains of Stone Creek Valley, they all reverted to me, parcel by parcel, acre by acre. Nobody fought it. They were too broke, too ashamed, or too busy running from their own mistakes. Within a year, the land was mine again. Officially, legally, righteously. I set to work rebuilding what mattered. First came the dam. I spent the better part of a summer hauling stones and reinforcing the breaches, working with a few trusted old-timers who remembered what the land had been before ambition poisoned it. The new Vance wall wasn't flashy, but it was strong. As the dam took shape, I let the wild grasses reclaim the broken lots. I let the creeks find their natural beds again. I let the deer and the foxes and the herons return to a land that was finally being treated with respect. My final touch came on a crisp autumn morning. I hauled an old cedar post up the new gravel road, sunk it deep, and mounted a heavy wooden sign I'd had carved by a local craftsman. It read simply, "Welcome to Highwater Acres. We respect the land here." Below that was the motto I had come to live by. Built by nature, protected by memory. I stepped back, wiped the sweat from my brow, and smiled. It wasn't just a sign. It was a declaration, a warning, a promise. No HOA would ever set foot here again. I often hike up to the rebuilt crest of the Vance Wall. I sit there, the stones still cool with morning dew, and watch the valley unfold. The mountain rumbles quietly beneath me, not with anger, but with satisfaction. It's a sound older than fences, older than lawsuits, older than greed, a sound that promises, in its own slow, deep way, that as long as someone listens, the land will endure. I raise my thermos in a silent toast to the past, to the land, to the future. Now I know what I did was extreme. I was legally protected, yes, but I still watched 58 homes get obliterated. Was my long game, forcing the system to fail and allowing nature to reclaim what was stolen, truly justified? Or did I cross a line by refusing to save the dam? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Where is the line between self-defense of your family legacy and becoming the agent of the very destruction you despise? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of bureaucratic battles and the quiet power of inheritance.